Good afternoon, everyone. I am here to read you two books. One of them is has a special place in my heart because when I had my second son, my first son came to the hospital to see his little brother, and one of the nurses gave him the book Goodnight Moon, and we read it so many times, and it makes me think back to when my kids were little. The second book I'm going to read is called Goodnight, Goon, because we're kind of getting ready for Halloween. It's just a little over a week away, a week from tomorrow. This is a parody. A parody is an imitation of a writer, artist, or subject in such a way as to make fun of or comment on the original work. Parodies are often exaggerated in a way that they imitate the original in order to produce a humorous effect. So this is kind of funny, but first we're going to read Goodnight Moon. Goodnight Moon. It was written by Margaret Weiss Brown. You probably have this book. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs, and 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens, and a little toy house and a young mouse, and a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush, and a quiet old lady who was whispering, "Hush." Good night, room. What a great room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears and good night, chairs. Good night, kittens and good night, mittens. Good night, clocks and good night, socks. Good night, little house and good night, mouse. Good night, comb and good night, brush. Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. Mush is like oatmeal. And good night to the old lady whispering, "Hush." Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. And that's the end of Goodnight Moon. Now we're going to read Goodnight, Goon, a petrifying parody. This is written by Michael Rex. In the cold gray tomb, there was a gravestone and a black lagoon and a picture of Martians taking over the moon. And there were 3 little mummies rubbing their tummies, and 2 hairy claws and a set of jaws, and a loud screechy bat and a black hat. There's the bat, the hat, the claws, ooh, the jaws, and a skull and a shoe and a pot full of goo, and a hairy old werewolf who was hollering, "Boo!" Good night, tomb. Good night, goon. Good night, Martians taking over the moon. Do you guys think this is funny or scary? I think this is funny. Good night, bones and the black lagoon. Good night, mummies. Good night, tummies. Good night, claws and good night, jaws. Good night, moans and good night, groans. Good night, screechy bat and good night, hat. Goodnight skull and goodnight shoe. Goodnight creature, goodnight goo. And goodnight to the old werewolf hollering, boo! Goodnight, you. Get under there. Goodnight, monsters everywhere. So there's a monster under the bed, kind of like one of the books that we read last week when I read to your classes. And that's the end of Goodnight Goon. I hope you liked both the stories. Maybe you've heard one, maybe you've heard both, maybe you've heard neither, and now you've heard both. So I hope you guys have a great weekend. Today is Friday. I will be back here on Monday to read you more great books. Have a good weekend. Bye.